Let me ask you something right up front. Have you ever been punished for trying to save people from themselves? I'm talking about pouring your heart and your sweat into building something that could save an entire neighborhood, only to watch it get bulldozed because one woman in power thought it looked ugly. You do the right thing, they slap you with a fine. And when disaster hits, well, sometimes karma doesn't need a courtroom. It just needs a little rain. My name's Ethan Mercer, and the only reason I became the villain of Willowbrook Estates was because I understood one thing nobody else seemed to get: water always wins. 30 years as a civil engineer will do that to you. I could spot trouble in a rain cloud and read runoff patterns like a road map. So when I retired and inherited my father's house right at the edge of this neat little community bowl where the hills funnel every drop straight toward my backyard, I didn't just sit back and hope the old drainage held up. I built a barrier stone by stone with my own hands, every angle measured, every drain calculated to survive the kind of storm that hits once in 100 years. I should have known that nothing you build with calloused hands stands a chance against the kind of power that shows up in a white Mercedes with a perfect manicure and a legal pad. Victoria Langford, chairwoman of our HOA and a self-styled landscape architect, breezed onto my driveway like she was appraising a piece of modern art. Only in her mind, my barrier wasn't art, it was a crime scene. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "never. Ethan, always. Mr. Mercer, I've received multiple complaints about your unauthorized construction. This structure violates our community covenants. It's an eyesore." I tried to explain, not that it mattered. I laid out the topography, the flood risk, the way rain would pool right where she was standing. She listened the way you listen to a child explaining monsters under the bed, barely. She handed me a $10,000 fine right there, cold as ice, and told me I had 2 weeks to tear down everything I'd built or she'd pursue legal remediation. And just like that, my entire career, my years of preventing disasters, shrunk to the weight of a few pieces of paper. I begged her to reconsider, told her the Weather Service was predicting a wild season. But all she could say was, "I've lived here for 12 years, Mr. Mercer, and we've never had any flooding issues. Maybe you should trust the professionals who built this place." Yeah, the professionals. Let me back up a sec. Turns out the company that put in the original drainage was Langford Construction, Victoria's husband's outfit. They'd installed smaller pipes than the plans called for, pocketed the savings, and no one the wiser except a few city planners, and apparently one too curious engineer who now owned the problem spot. I still tried to fight. I put together a technical presentation, maps, rainfall data, flood models. She wasn't having it. She went full PR mode, spun up a Facebook group called Willowbrook Beautiful, posted pictures that made my 5-foot stone wall look like a prison barricade, and pretty soon neighbors I'd never even met were commenting about selfish homeowners and ruined property values. At the emergency HOA meeting, the whole place was stacked against me. People waving printouts of her posts, parroting her lines about aesthetic harmony. I stood up, asked Victoria, "Do you even know what a 100-year flood event is? Do you have a degree in engineering?" But she just smiled. That politician smile told everyone, "We're not here to debate theories. We're here to protect our neighborhood's character." And right then the room turned, except for a few folks like Mrs. Henderson, who mentioned seeing surveyors near the HOA building, or Bob Miller, who'd heard something about a new wellness center going in. Victoria's face twitched when I pressed her on it, but she brushed it off, said any future improvements would be announced through proper channels. When I walked home that night, I felt every set of eyes on my back, felt the weight of little notes in my mailbox, anonymous, of course, telling me to just follow the rules. I was 2 days from the deadline when I gave up, hauled every stone out myself, cataloged everything, sent the HOA my last warning. You're one storm away from disaster. Not that anyone read it. That same evening, I got a call from my old friend at the National Weather Service. "Ethan, it's bad. There's a system brewing you need to watch out for." 10 days after the last stone left my property, Hurricane Jillian made landfall 6 hours ahead of the forecast. I sat up late that night, modeling the storm on my laptop, watching the numbers turn red, rainfall, wind. The whole neighborhood's drainage capacity was about to get blown to hell. I discovered in the city records that the storm drains were undersized by 40% Langford Construction, again saving money at everyone else's expense. And right as I was about to sound the alarm, Victoria started shutting me down, sent out notices calling me a fearmonger, ordered that all emergency messages had to be approved by the board. She even told the neighborhood I was harassing people, threatened me with legal action if I talked to anyone about unverified weather information, every single trick in the book. But here's the twist. Margaret Collins from down on Elm Street reached out. Turns out she'd been a municipal accountant, had files showing Victoria and her family were getting kickbacks from Greenfield Development, the outfit planning to buy up the land for the new resort. The plan was simple block any talk of flooding pushed through the development and let the rest of us deal with the mess. When the storm hit, all hell broke loose. Water poured through the depression, ripped up fences, sent lawn chairs and sedans floating down the street. I watched from my second-story office as the HOA building, the one Victoria had built on the old wetland, just vanished under the surge foundation and all. Later, picking through the debris, I found her filing cabinet wedged against my fence. Inside were bank statements, contracts, and a phone with voice messages. They spelled out everything Victoria's daughter Emily was running point at Greenfield, and the whole family was profiting from suppressing flood warnings and pushing through construction. Margaret and I put together the story, money trails, contracts, emails. We called in every connection we had. The news picked it up. I posted a drone video showing exactly how the flood followed the path I'd predicted where my barrier had once stood. The story went viral. Civil engineers and urban planners all over the country commented, "How did they let this happen?" By the time the dust settled, Margaret had started the Willowbrook Truth Coalition. Residents rallied and Victoria hired a crisis PR firm to accuse me of engineering the flood on purpose. Can you believe that? But the real clincher was Jake Morrison, a former Greenfield engineer who'd been fired for refusing to fake environmental reports. He handed over files proving this wasn't just Willowbrook. There were a dozen other communities, all with the same scam, underbuilt drainage bribed HOA boards cover-ups. Federal investigators got involved, the state attorney general's office subpoenaed records, and suddenly Victoria and her husband were facing criminal charges for fraud and endangerment, with Greenfield's assets frozen and their development plans torched. I'll never forget the day the committee handed down the ruling. Victoria banned from HOA work for life, $500,000 in restitution, her family's business ruined. Margaret took over as interim chair and rewrote the community bylaws. Now every big project needs a real technical review and a community vote. We even turned the old flood barrier site into a park, native plants, walking trails, and flood retention engineered to blend right into the landscape. People drive in from all over to see it now. Funny, isn't it? The very thing they wanted gone ended up saving the community in every sense. Sometimes justice comes in the shape of a flood. Sometimes it takes a whole mess of stubborn people to stand up to power to say no more. And sometimes, it just takes a guy with a shovel and a little common sense to outlast the storm. But that's not the end. There's always another Victoria out there, another backroom deal, another storm brewing. So here's my question to you. When you see something wrong, do you keep your head down? Or do you stand up even when the crowd's against you? Would you risk your peace for what's right, or would you let them bulldoze you too? If you've ever fought for your community, or you just believe in standing up to corruption, I'd love to hear your story. Drop a comment below. Tell me what you think about justice, about HOA power, or just about the last time you went up against a storm and refused to back down. And if you want to see more stories about ordinary folks taking on extraordinary odds, hit like and subscribe, because sometimes sharing the truth is the bravest thing you can do.